Good morning, everybody. Hello, hello. Out there, hello. My name is Jesse Kreitzer. I am your point person. I'm helping to coordinate this year's 7th annual Slow Living Summit. So big round of applause for Wyndham Groves, Orly Munzing, Jim Verzino. We have over 200 registered attendees, over 3 dozen speakers coming within 2 days. I hope you get a lot out of it. I can speak for myself personally. I was born and raised in Marlborough, Vermont. And I came back here after 13 years. This is home to me. All right. And I've seen Vermont change. I'm trying to assess after 13 years, how has it changed? I care deeply about this land. And for my own sake, as a young filmmaker returning to a place that I care deeply about, and what does that actually look like? And what I've discovered is Vermont, as a predominantly rural state, geographically isolated, I yearn for these opportunities to just come together. And it doesn't matter if it's in a living room or in a meeting space in downtown Brattleboro or CCV or the co-op, when I'm shopping, whatever it may be, finding these opportunities. So I cannot congratulate Orly enough for facilitating these sorts of opportunities. I find that they are so essential, especially I can just look in the room. We are anxious and hungry and yearning and passionate. And please don't lose that. I know it's hard. We are in it together, and you're not alone. And I think that's a common sentiment that I've seen shared, especially for Vermonters, New Englanders, where sometimes the connective tissue is not as strong as it needs to be. And so I hope you find those opportunities over the next 2 days. I'll be around if you have questions, concerns, comments. Please, I'm your point person, so let me know how I can help, how we're doing, what's not working. I'd love to all input. So thank you all for coming. Make good use of your time. I just want to briefly introduce Jim Verzino first. Actually, Orly, you want to come up first?
Sure.
Orly Munzing, Executive Director. The reason we're here. Thanks, Orly.
Well, can we take the highlight? I'm too short for this. I want to thank everyone for coming. This is great. I'm sure there'll be more people coming in here. As Jesse said, we were delighted to see that way over 200 people signed up, and we're very excited. And really, I just want to tell you, some people were asking me, really, what is slow living? Well, we took 2 words. We took slow and we took living. And we put slow in front of living. And what does that really mean? It's even become more important in the climate, the political climate, and so forth that we have today. What it means is slowing down, being mindful to yourself, mindful to your community, and mindful to your workers, and giving back to the community. All the speakers that you will hear today volunteered to do this, brought themselves here. They're all giving back to the community, and that's why they're so successful. And unfortunately, we were all raised to live in the fast lane and think about what it is that we can extract from our community. And my fear today is that we're reverting to that. So we need more thinkers like the people here who can understand the importance and the joy of giving back. I live very fast, sleep very little, but I try to remind myself to slow down and take care of myself, my community, my family, and so forth. So that's what the whole thing with slow living is. And I want to thank all of you here. I wish we can get people who don't really understand it in this room as well for coming. So Strolling of the Heifers has been around for 16 years. We listen to the community. And each year we use the parade and festival that fuels our funding for all the good programs we do year-round. So for example, we have a workforce development. We have a culinary nutrition program called Farm to Table. which trains people who are underemployed, and that fuels workers for our other program, which is Wyndham Grows, which scales up small businesses that support farms, and that's what we're about, is supporting farms. So with that, I would like to introduce Jim Verzino, who is the director of Wyndham Grows, and he can tell you a little bit more about that. And Jim Verzino.
I cannot stand behind a podium. It just doesn't work. Oh, I guess I'm going to stand behind a podium anyhow, aren't I? Okay, so don't want to take up too much of your time. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Too loud? Too loud? Yeah. The slow living summits of many years ago were interesting in that they were systemic in nature. And one of the moves we're making now is, and the questions we got was, what can I do about that myself? Because you'd kind of walk out of it and be like, these are terrible, giant systems problems, what can I do? And starting and growing your own entity that addresses one small piece of the problem is the thing that individuals can do. And that's what we're here to help everyone do. One of my greatest mentors years ago told me, if I want to do something, get around people that are already doing it. And that's what we're doing here in the next couple of days, right? There's going to be investors here, there's going to be other entrepreneurs here, and I encourage you to get in the sessions, get with these people, and start talking to them. Grab them, do whatever you need to do. This is an easy access situation. So when you're here, take advantage of your time. We all like to be wallflowers sometimes, sit around, have a coffee, relax, but this is a rare opportunity to be with the kind of people that you want to be with and the kind of people that you want to get to know. So I would encourage you as much as possible to attend the sessions. We have openings to, if people want to tell their stories at Fail Friday. I'll be telling one of my biggest failures at Fail Friday, one my family doesn't even know, so I'm a little bit worried about getting on the YouTube when they find out how much money I lost. And come to Fail Friday. You can sign up for it. Tell your failure story, because we learned from our failures way more than we learned from our successes. We've still got a spot or two if someone wants to pitch to investors. And we've got a pitch session that Joe Heston will be doing this afternoon. Don't need to attend it though. These are real investors with real money. Even if you don't have a PowerPoint, if you've got an idea that you're already building or that you want to build and you want to pitch it, find me or go to somebody at the registration table, tell them that you want to pitch to the investors. That's tonight at 5 or 5:30. And entrepreneurial speed dating is going to be awesome. That's tonight at 7. So all that stuff, great stuff. And we good? Raj, I'm going to stop screaming into this microphone. So without further ado, this guy is awesome. He's here of his own volition. We're not paying him. And he's incredible. I'm so excited he decided to come with us. Raj Sisodia.
Thank you. Oops. I can go on and on, so I'm just going to put a timer, okay? Good morning. Good morning. Great to be with you today. And I really do appreciate all the pictures and the theme. You know, I come from a land where cows are sacred. You know that, right? And I also slight delay over here. Oops. I shouldn't get this side. We don't want to lean too far to the right, is what we're saying. Okay. But I also come from a farming family. You know, my grandfather, my uncles, everybody in India is involved in, we have lots of cows and everything else. And my father actually is an agriculture scientist, a PhD in cytogenetics. So what I'm telling you is I'm very much in harmony with what happens here in Vermont and what many of you are trying to do, which is to nourish our bodies and our souls. And I think that's what this journey is about. How can we use business as a way to create flourishing in the world, not just as a way to make money, how business can in fact uplift humanity. So we'll talk about this idea of a conscious approach to capitalism. And what it's really about ultimately, and I think a lot of the entities that are organizing this event, we're trying to build a conscious, flourishing society, right? What does it take to build the ideal society where we have flourishing of every kind for all forms of life? And it really does take the three pillars. You have business, you have government, and civil society, education, non-profits, and others, working together to create those conditions in which human beings can flourish. And the common element really is operating with higher consciousness. All these entities exist everywhere. Can we elevate our consciousness to redefine why we exist? What are we about? And how do we then cooperate towards that higher purpose that we all share, which is human flourishing? And within that, we're going to focus on the business sector, of course. And I think one of the ways to summarize this message is to say that it's time for business overall as a sector in our economy to wake up. I think we've been kind of asleep in a way, unconscious. Right? We have to grow up and show up, be part of the major challenges that we all face, not just leverage opportunities to make money, but actually be part of the solution. Not be adding to the problems while we're trying to make money, but to be part of the solution and be profitable at the same time, which is important actually. It's, we do need those profits in society. So let's talk about this idea of waking up. Rising to a higher consciousness. Think about the analog or the parallel with butterflies and caterpillars, right? When you first discover as a child that the caterpillar becomes a butterfly, that's kind of a magical moment, right? It's like, how can that be? They don't look anything alike, they don't act anything alike, but it's the same creature, same DNA. But it exists at two levels of consciousness, if you will. Certainly two physical forms, but also two levels of consciousness. So the caterpillar is all about consumption. That's all a caterpillar really is programmed to do, right? It just eats everything in its path. But then nature turns on these things called imaginal cells, and it enters that metamorphosis phase, becomes transformed and emerges as this other creature. A creature of light and beauty, right? The butterfly is one of the most beautiful things we have in nature. But what else does a butterfly do beyond? Pollinate, right? So without butterflies and bees and so forth, the rest of humanity and the planet and life of all kinds would not flourish were it not for this function that's performed by butterflies and bees and so forth. So cross-pollination, in the process of living out its life, is actually creating flourishing in the system for others. Now, it doesn't do that consciously, of course. The caterpillar doesn't wake up one day and say, what kind of life am I living, empty, without any meaning and purpose, right? But for us human beings, it is a choice. We are kind of born in a caterpillar, slug-like mode, right? I mean, if you think about it, babies are born too early, right? Human babies can't do anything. But some of us can get stuck. Like, have you met any 45-year-old caterpillars? It's all about consumption, all about, right, taking, in a way. We get in that mode of it's just about material accumulation, and you keep doing that, and at the end of the life, I have this much, therefore I win, and then I die, right? But most of us actually, at some point, awaken to some kind of higher consciousness. That life is about more than just making a living, that it is about the impact we have and the legacy we leave behind. But that is a choice. It is a conscious decision that we have to make as to what level of consciousness we want to live at. Peter Kastenbaum said, we have reached such explosive levels of freedom that we are in charge of our own mutation. Okay, so we decide what we want to be. And think about all the great human, even Mahatma Gandhi wasn't born that way, okay? He was a corporate lawyer in South Africa. I mean, he wasn't born that way either, but he ended up being a corporate lawyer for a long time, working in South Africa for companies, dressed in shiny suits, right, and had no social conscience whatsoever, until one night when he got thrown out of a train in Durban because he was in the wrong compartment that said whites only. And he was thrown out, in winter on midnight, sitting at that train, on that train platform all night, and suddenly his eyes started opening and he awakened to the injustice all around. And that was the beginning of a huge transformation for him and then for many others, and certainly the liberation, the independence of India flowed from that as well. Right? So we human beings are capable of a transformation that is even more dramatic than what you see here with the caterpillar and butterfly. And the entities that we create in this world, organizations of any kind, and certainly corporations, they too have their own journey. And they are, in a way, born at that caterpillar stage. But many of them get stuck there. And in fact, when we talk about the only purpose of business is to maximize profit, essentially we're saying you must remain a caterpillar forever. That this business only exists to suck in resources, right? Natural resources, financial resources, human resources, which is a phrase I hope you will not use again. I'll talk about that. Human beings are not a resource. And produce profit out of that. Right? That's a caterpillar way of existing. Corporations too can rise in their consciousness and can be instruments of light and beauty and flourishing. And that's what this journey is about. But before we get into that, let's just talk about capitalism itself before we get into conscious capitalism. This is an institution that a lot of us take for granted. And we think it's been a part of human life or human civilization forever. It actually hasn't. It's a relatively recent idea in the form that we know it. And if you look at human history for the last 2,000 years, the economic history, we're able to estimate the per capita incomes with reasonable accuracy as measured in today's dollars, going back about 2,000 years. And you can see that there were roughly $400 to $500 per person per year for most of that time on a global basis. This is year $2,000, right? So think about what that means. That 90% of human beings lived on less than $1 a day, right? For almost all of history. You could go back a lot further. It wasn't any better. It could have been worse. So the default condition of humanity was to live in extreme abject poverty where survival was the only real thing you could aspire to. So you go from the year 0 to the year 1000 and you can see we actually went backwards. Per capita income fell in 1,000 years. Okay? Nowadays when we have 2 years of declining per capita income, it's a bit of a crisis, right? We've got a recession bordering on a depression. This is 1,000 years without any growth. You go into the next 500 years, you can see a tiny bit of progress, 20% improvement in 500 years. Okay, I guess that's better than nothing, right? But, we're coming out of the dark ages. Humanity is waking up. You have the Renaissance, flourishing of art and music, right? And then we had the invention of printing, the printing movable type printing press in the 15th century. Now these are big steps ahead for humanity, but they didn't impact ordinary people. 90% of people were illiterate. So the fact that books were now a tiny bit more affordable didn't really impact ordinary people, and the fact that Michelangelo is painting the Sistine Chapel didn't really impact a lot of people, right? You go another couple of hundred years, we have the age of reason, scientific advancement, enlightenment, Isaac Newton, Galileo, understanding the laws of nature, our place in the universe. Again, huge steps forward for humanity, no impact on ordinary lives. What finally changed was in the 18th century, when a number of things came together. First of all, the Industrial Revolution started roughly around 1750 in Scotland. And for the first time now, we could actually produce machines that could make products, as opposed to everything being made by hand. And so that was a dramatic rise in productivity, our ability to produce products at a low cost with consistent quality. And the places that had access to this technology saw a rise in their prosperity. So that was a big deal. Perhaps the biggest technological leap forward that humanity has ever taken, the Industrial Revolution. But that wasn't enough. That was a technological breakthrough, but there was also, we needed an intellectual breakthrough, and that came a quarter century later, also from Scotland. Okay? So you have to have new respect for Scotland now. I thought it was about Scotch whiskey and golf. That's enough, right? What else do you need? But they also gave us the Scottish Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, and a thinker named Adam Smith, who was a moral philosopher. There were no economists in the world in those days, right? There were only philosophers. And he wrote a book which has become now the foundation for understanding free markets called An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And his question was very simple. Why is it that some places are prosperous and other places are not around the world and over the course of history? And most people would have answered, of course, it has to do with natural resources. And he found that wasn't true. And others would have said it has to do with the work ethic. Some places people just work hard. Again, he found that wasn't true. Places with very similar cultures could evolve in very different ways economically. What he found was that the places that had prospered had greater amounts of freedom. That where human beings were free to focus on what they enjoyed and what they did well, and also free to exchange the value that they created with others, right? They're free to produce and free to trade. That those places actually saw higher prosperity, when individuals had that kind of freedom. Now remember, in most societies, people did not. You were restricted in terms of what you could do. And there were severe restrictions also in terms of bartering and trading and so forth. But if you could create that kind of freedom, that people would actually sense what other people need, and they would meet each other's needs by leveraging their own strengths and their own interests. So this is the idea of the invisible hand of the market, that far better than any central planning authority, some government or bureaucrat or monarch deciding how much of what do we need and who's going to produce it and what will be the price and just trying to manage, it cannot be managed. Central planning doesn't work. Let people operate from a sense of freedom. People will sense and respond. And collectively, most needs, not every need, but most needs of most people get met far better, more efficiently, more effectively that way. So that was a great intellectual breakthrough, explaining the power of markets. Now, 1776 was also the year, of course, that this country was born, right? And you think about it, historically, as far as I know, there's no other country that has ever been created on the basis of a set of ideas. Every other country exists for other reasons, historical, geographic, whatever it is. This country exists because a group of people came together and had shared beliefs around freedom. Religious freedom to start with, but then political freedom and economic freedom. And those were enshrined into that extraordinary document, the Declaration of Independence, which is one of the most inspiring documents for all of humanity, because it's laid down the fundamental aspirations of human beings. There's a fundamental disposition and right for human beings to be free. And that was part of the encoding of the DNA of this country. Now, of course, it wasn't fully reflected in actual lives, right? It excluded, certainly, the native population, it excluded slaves, of course, it excluded women. But over time, those ideas have become more and more realized. And the power of those ideas has been extraordinary from the beginning. So you can see that the combination of these three things, the technological breakthrough, the intellectual breakthrough, and this oxygen of freedom that existed here more than anywhere else, where the common person was in charge of their own destiny by right of law. You did not have to be born into the landed gentry or the aristocracy. If you worked hard, right, and you had ambition, you could actually rise from nothing to great heights. And there are countless stories of that in this country. And that really hadn't existed anywhere else. So that combination enabled humanity to take off. So if you look at every indicator of human well-being, starting with per capita incomes have risen 1,500% in those 200 years, in real terms. And of course, in the developed world, it's risen almost 100 times. Right? Dramatic improvements in per capita income, but also life expectancy was 28 to 30 for most of that time. It's now about 72 worldwide. Human population reached about 1 billion in 1820 for the first time. Now it's 7.3 billion. Literacy, as I said, has gone from 10% to 90%. And many other indicators, right? So we have many, many more human beings living longer, more truly human lives where they are actually able to experience what it means to be. Remember, when you're living at subsistence level, you really cannot experience what it means to be a human being. There's an expression, this planet used to be molten lava and now it sings opera. Where does that come from? It comes from human beings exploring their own higher capacities. When you're struggling to survive, you can't do that. As they say, most people have been born and have lived and have died with their music still inside them. They never got the chance to express the gifts that they came with. But increasingly today, more and more of us do have that opportunity. So again, this system that has enabled that has liberated the extraordinary potential of human beings when they live in freedom. When there's economic freedom, but also, of course, political freedom and all kinds of freedom, human beings do prosper. And not just prosper, but they live more meaningful lives. And there's a belief among many in this world that capitalism is actually an instrument inherently designed to be one of exploitation, that it's about making a few people rich and keeping other people down. And that's really not the case. I mean, if you look at the data on people living in poverty, extreme poverty as defined by $1.25 a day by the World Bank, it was 90% and it's down to about 12 or 13%. Projections are that we will eradicate this in the next 20 to 30 years. Just like we've eradicated many diseases, extreme poverty is a kind of disease. It's an unnatural state. Okay, and if you create the conditions in the right way, human beings will actually eradicate that. Today, 250,000 people will be lifted out of extreme poverty, and tomorrow another 250,000, every single day. Why is this happening? Because we are spreading freedom. The real issue in the world is not so much the unequal distribution of income, although that also is important, but also the unequal distribution of freedom. In those parts of the world where freedom is limited, we find poverty, and when you start bringing more freedom, again, political and economic freedom, you start to see a rise in prosperity. So we need to focus on that and recognize that this is a system that has given us a lot. It has flaws, and we'll get into the flaws, right? But junking it in favor of other ways that simply haven't worked, do not work, socialism, for example, right? That's not the answer. We have to fix this. We have to retain what is extraordinary about this, the dynamism, but we have to bring in the decency, right? That's often seen as a choice. You can either have dynamism or you can have decency, right? You can have capitalism or socialism. We want the best of both, right? Because the other system promises decency, but it ends up being an equal sharing of misery in many cases. I just came back from Cuba, you can see the consequences of that kind of system. Yeah, sure, there are a few bright spots, there are a few things, but overall, that's not creating the kinds of lives that people really want. So if you think about what has happened in the last 100 years, so we've had all this progress, but what else has happened? Alongside that progress, especially in the last 100 years, we have had consequences. 80% of natural forests are gone. Now some of them are being replaced now by fast-growing trees and so forth, but we have certainly lost a lot of that. Much of the arable land is becoming unusable for various reasons. 90% of the large mammals are gone. Our oceans are emptying out of the large fish, and even some of the smaller ones, 95% of the large fish, like the tuna. And species extinction continues at a pretty rapid rate. Half of the species we have will not be here in 50 years at the current rate. And the consequences on human health are also starting to show up. So on the one hand, yes, we are living longer, but a lot of us are kept alive and prolonged, and we have long periods of unhealthy aging. Right, extreme high rates of cancer. Now, the President's Commission on Cancer issued their report under the Obama administration a few years ago. We had Stonyfield Yogurt, Gary Hirschberg. They're from New Hampshire, right? Somehow I just assumed they're from Vermont, but they're from New Hampshire. But he gave a talk at our conference. He talked about some of this data. According to that last report, 44% of Americans alive today can expect to get cancer in their lifetime, including 50% of men and 33% of women. Now that number was about 25% in the Reagan administration. Now it's up to 44. Okay? Now that's a very steep rise in a very short amount of time. And 100 years ago it was quite rare. Right? So there is something happening when the cord blood of a newborn baby has 187 known carcinogens. There's something obviously happening. We are running a massive uncontrolled experiment on human health with all of the chemically assisted living in every aspect of our lives, right? I mean, individually it may not matter for each product, but if you add it all up and accumulate it over decades, there is a consequence, right? So we have that, we have obesity crisis, we have all kinds of diabetes and so forth. So there is a rising incidence that, and that's leaving aside the psychological toll of the way we work, the extreme rise in stress and depression and those kinds of things as well, right? So there have been a lot of negative consequences too, right? And the price sometimes might exceed the benefits. So we have to look at that too. What is the cost, and can we do it in a different way? So as a result of all of that, great advances, but at the same time, a lot of so-called negative side effects. You've seen that confidence in big business especially has plummeted. Not so much in small business. About 60% of Americans still have confidence in small business. But when it comes to big business, about 18 to 20%. In fact, it was down to 16% in the last economic crisis. 84% of Americans did not trust business, big business, large companies, publicly traded companies. Right? More people trusted the US Congress in 2008. Now, the Congress has always been at the bottom of this ranking, okay? Ever since they started doing it. It's about 18 societal institutions. The military is the highest. US military at 80%. Big business, banking, HMOs, Congress. The rogues gallery is down there, okay? But there's something worrisome about that, because if you think about it, what does that mean? When people are that cynical and that disengaged and that distrustful, can they be innovative? Can they be creative? Can they be caring? When you're operating from a survival mode, you really cannot be innovative. Your body physiologically shuts down your capacity to create, because it's all about survival. And most people in their work lives are in a survival mode. And that level of cynicism and distrust has a huge societal cost. Not only does it make those lives of those people far less happy and meaningful, but it also means collectively we don't get the kind of innovation and creativity that we are going to need. There's nothing that we will be able to do in the next 100 years in the way that we did it the last 100 years. Whether it's food, whether it's transportation, whether it's housing, whether it's clothing, whether it's anything. We're going to have to reinvent every aspect of our lives. Do you agree? Can we do it the same way? Because all of that was dependent on a set of non-renewable, limited amounts of resources, right? Much of which has been extracted and used. We're going to have to figure out new ways in everything. And it's not going to descend from heaven. It's going to come from the mind of some human being, the answer to each of those challenges. And that doesn't happen when you're cynical and disengaged, right? And distrustful. So this is a matter of some urgency. We have to do this for many, many, many reasons. It's also at some level an existential issue, right? We need to reinvent everything, and therefore we need to create the conditions in which we can do that. So where did we go wrong? We had this extraordinary idea, this extraordinary institution rooted in fundamentally great things like human freedom and dignity, and yet now we are looking at a lot of negative consequences that have flown from that. I would say that the biggest single problem has been this idea that business exists for one reason, and that is to make money. Profit maximization as an idea has been extraordinarily harmful, because it is a very narrow and selfish and instrumental way of thinking about business. It says that business exists only for my benefit, that I'm going to use all the people who are part of it to achieve my goals. So they become means to my end. Right? So it's selfish, it's instrumental, and it's narrow. Businesses make a lot more than money. They have many, many impacts on our lives. We act like it's only about money. Money is not the only game in town. There are other games in town. Okay? And we have ignored all of that. We've made this into a very one-dimensional activity where people end up being a means to another end. People need to be the end. The highest purpose has to be people. But people have now become subsidiary to other ends. So we need to get rid of these old dehumanized and toxic ways of thinking about business. Not only that idea that profit is the only purpose, but also some other ideas. Some people think business is like a machine. This certainly happened during the industrial age, and when we had this era of scientific management and so forth, when they thought everything can be quantified and measured and so forth. You can run it like a flat factory, right? Every business is like a factory. You got inputs and then you got outputs, right? It's not a factory. It's not a machine. It's a living, breathing thing. You have a lot of people who have a cavalier approach. It's a game. You play some bets, we win some, we lose some, you move on, you sell, you move on. There are real lives at stake. Okay, it's not a game. We have CEOs who say, you guys take this too seriously. Okay? It's just business. A lot of people have made it into a math problem, especially academics, many economists and others, right? It's extreme quantification. You pick up a journal of business, you can't understand one word that's in there. Okay, because it's equations that run into 3 lines trying to model and describe something, very little relevance and impact, right? And this whole idea of profit maximization, like this, that's a math problem, right? So maximize this subject to all of these constraints. It's not a math problem. Business is far more complex than that. And most toxically, this idea that business is a form of war. Now think about it. The language and all the metaphors and ways of organizing and thinking about business, especially when it comes to larger corporations, have all come from the military. Because in the 19th century, when we first started having large companies, the only large organizations that existed anywhere were armies. And therefore, when we started setting up companies, we borrowed a lot of the ideas. So the hierarchy, the command and control, right? The general at the top, the foot soldiers at the bottom. I mean, that whole thing got replicated. The language of strategy and tactics and operations is directly from the military terminology. Strategic weapons, tactical weapons, that's where it originates, right? Capturing market share, treating your competitors as your bitter enemies, customers as territory to be conquered, and so forth. There's a very, very militaristic mindset at the root of business, where business is a warfare by other means. And think about it, war is inherently a lose-lose proposition. Sports is a win-lose proposition. Business has to be a win-win proposition. You cannot have a win-win mindset when you think of it as a war. Because even if you win a war, all you're doing is planting the seeds for the next war. Do you know that in Europe they had 1,200 wars between European countries in 600 years? Yep. Until 1946? Okay, 2 a year. None of those wars obviously solved any problems, right? But again, we have that mentality that is deep, still even today in the world of business. So it's not all of those things. So what is it? It's about the real lives of real people. It's one of the most human things that we can do. And we have to remember that. Now, Calvin Coolidge said just before the Great Depression, the business of America is business. That's the genius of this country. That's the DNA of this country. And of course, he meant it's about making money. But Herb Kelleher, the legendary CEO of Southwest Airlines, said the business of business is people. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, it's nothing else. It's about people. It's about the lives we touch. Okay? And we've lost sight of that. And that's what we have to get back to. And the cows. So that's one set of challenges, right? We have thought about business in a way that hasn't really served. But there's also something else that, the world has changed a lot. Would you agree? Yeah. And sometimes it's that old thing about, what is it, lobster? What do you, the thing that boils and doesn't realize it's dying? Is it lobsters? Frogs? Whatever. It's either pretty bad either way. But we've been in the midst of a lot of change. In our own lifetimes, a lot has changed. But somehow when you're in it, you don't actually recognize how much has changed. When you step back, you say, oh my God. Can you imagine how much has changed just in the last quarter century? So the world has gone through dramatic shifts within a very short period of time, and we human beings have changed a lot. We are evolving at a rapid rate. Things are happening in decades that used to take millennia in terms of our own evolution as human beings. What's happening inside us. And businesses simply haven't adapted to all this change. Anytime the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside any entity, sooner or later there'll be a disconnect. Everything has been changing outside, not much has changed inside business. It's like, if you use a computer metaphor, we're using an operating system that was developed in the 19th century with the military as the organizing metaphor. That operating system is quite out of date. We need a new operating system for business. So what has changed? I mentioned 1776 was a pretty big year. What about 1989? What happened in 89? Anybody remember the headline story of 89? Berlin Wall, what happened to the Berlin Wall? It just fell. That lousy commie construction, right? It's like, no, it was brought down, okay, with hammers and chisels, okay? It was brought down because it was the symbol of this fundamental divide. You know, the defining debate of the 20th century was between these competing ideologies of how do we organize human society. Democracy, capitalism, freedom. On the one hand, socialism, communism, dictatorship, government ownership and control of every aspect of your life on the other hand. And these were seen as alternatives, and the whole world had to line up. You're not either you're with us or against us. And we had that Cold War for decades, right? And did anybody think it was going to end well? Remember MAD, mutually assured destruction? The US and the Soviet Union could destroy each other and the planet 75 times over. Right? We had nuclear shelters in every school. Remember, in my generation, if there was a button somewhere, you never pressed it because something might blow up. Okay? They lived in fear. I mean, there was a cloud hanging over our lives. Real. It was very real. Far exceeds the threat of terrorism or whatever we have today. That threat was far greater if you really think about it. And suddenly, without a gunshot being fired, that debate is over. Because one side of that debate was about something that is fundamentally not in harmony with human nature. That was a form of slavery. Living in those conditions without any freedom was unnatural for human beings. So it's a dramatic change. Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History. Certainly one big chapter in human history. Ended because there was a universal consensus that some form of Western liberal democracy is the best way that we know to organize human society. Now what form that exactly takes, we've started to experiment a lot more since then. We have a lot more different kinds of free market societies as well as different democratic forms, but ultimately rooted all in freedom. So that happened in November of 89. This was in June of 89. Remember that scene in Tiananmen Square in China? So that preceded the Berlin Wall by a few months, and in many ways inspired other changes. Now in this case, the tanks did roll and hundreds of those kids were killed by the Communist Party, People's Army, Red Army. But they did inspire, because if those kids could stand up to that regime, then certainly people around the world could aspire to freedom. So massive change happened in the world that year on a political front and economic and social as well. We also had the Exxon Valdez oil spill that year. That's kind of a big deal, right? Yeah. A lot of people were really, their environmental consciousness was awakened. People flying to Alaska and trying to help those little ducks and otters or whatever, right? Many spills that happened before but didn't have the same kind of impact. So the birth or re-emergence of environmental consciousness on a mass scale. We also had on the other side of the ledger the re-emergence of religious fundamentalism. So Salman Rushdie, an author, British author of Indian origin actually, wrote a book called The Satanic Verses, which was deemed as blasphemous to Islam. So the Ayatollah in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a death sentence against him, a fatwa. 10 people were killed. He went into hiding for 10 years. In a way, you could say this was the beginnings of re-emergence of religious fundamentalism. Remember, we used to have holy wars for a lot of human history, but then we had a couple of secular centuries. But now we have started to see again the re-emergence of this fundamentalism, and now we have Hindu fundamentalism and Christian fundamentalism on the rise, etc. in response to that. So it's like we had the end of economic fundamentalism, but now something stepping into that vacuum. And part of that also has to do with a lack of opportunity in many parts of the world. An entrepreneur and a terrorist are two sides of the same coin in many societies, okay? When you have 50% unemployment, then these kinds of messages start to become more appealing to a lot of people when you don't have economic opportunity. Okay, so all that happened in 89. What else happened? There was a demographic change, a pretty dramatic one, although nobody actually saw it at the time, but if you think about it, 1989, we had more adults over the age of 40 than below for the first time. Why? Because societies are aging around the world. Why are they aging? Because birth rates are falling and people are living longer. So the median age keeps going up almost everywhere. And When you have more adults over 40 than below, that is a tipping point. Why? What does 40 mean? What does 40 represent in a human lifespan?
Midway point.
Midway, and therefore what's supposed to happen?
Coming closer to death.
Yeah, downhill, closer to death. But what? There's a grow up, but before you grow up, you have to go through a crisis. Have you heard of midlife crisis? Doesn't happen in Vermont, I guess. You guys are well-adjusted people up here, close to the soil. But the rest of us are supposed to have a crisis, right? Buy a convertible, get some, I don't know, men especially. But yeah, people do go through, it's a real thing. There's lots of jokes about it, but it's a real thing. There is a midlife crisis. Developmental psychology, if you look at the literature, it says, yeah, there's a crisis of meaning and purpose because people have lived their lives up to that point with a certain set of priorities and values and goals. And by the age of 40, maybe they've achieved some of them. They've got the house, the car, whatever, all the stuff, material stuff. And people start to then say, well, I'm not as satisfied. I feel empty. Right? Is this all there is? The rest of my life a repeat of the same? Go to work, come home, watch TV, have dinner, go to bed, go home. Every day the same thing. Like, what's the point? What is the meaning of my life? The highest selling book of the last several decades is The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. Sold 50 million copies. As an author, I can only dream. There's a hunger for meaning and purpose, and it gets extenuated at midlife. People start volunteering for causes that have nothing to do with their self-interest. Their mothers in Minnesota are spending every waking moment worrying about teenage trafficking in Thailand. And it has nothing to do with their self-interest, and yet has everything to do with them as human beings. They want to make a difference in the lives of others. That is deeply, deeply satisfying and important. Human beings need to care. It's as powerful as our self-interest is our need to care. And somehow we left that out of business and capitalism. We built it on one pillar, self-interest. Human beings have many dimensions. So this hunger for meaning and purpose has become pronounced. About 100 countries in the world have a birth rate below 2.1, which is replacement. Societies are aging rapidly. In India, when I was growing up, the birth rate was about 6 per woman. Today it's about 2.5. Okay? And it'll fall to 2.1 in about 10 years, and then it'll be below replacement. Many countries, Singapore is 0.7. Japan has been about 1.1 for 40 years. Very few babies in Japan. People live forever. Okay, you got 8 great-grandparents and 1 kid. But society is changing a lot, but we're going to have this as a phenomenon, which is going to be quite dramatic. People are in that stage of life where they are looking for more. In the book Forms of Endearment, we called it the age of transcendence, where people are transcending just the material, and they are now motivated by higher things. Okay? And roughly 1990s when that age started, because of all these changes that happened in 89. So what else happened in 89? So this guy invented something that year that changed all of your lives and the lives of just about everybody on this planet. And yet nobody knows who he is. He could be standing there in the back lurking. Who is this guy? Tim Berners-Lee. Okay, you get a prize. Give him a cow. You get a cow. Sorry. What do you do? Oh, come on. That was Al Gore. Huh? So, yeah, World Wide Web. Right? He invented the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee in 1989 invented this whole idea of how we use the internet today, right? The web, right? All the HTTP and hyperlinking and URL and all of that stuff basically originated. Is that a big deal? Is the web a big deal? Yeah? Think about it. The ordinary person today has access to more information instantaneously at their fingertips, anytime, any place, for free, on any subject, than the richest billionaire in the world did 20 years ago. True? As they say in Washington, that's a true fact. Okay? Remember, now we have 3 kinds. You got true facts, you got facts, and now we have alternative facts. Right? You got true fact. Yeah? I had a question the other day, and my daughter, of course, got the answer in 1/3 of a second. I don't know how she does it. Right? I know how she does it, but I don't know how she does it that fast, right? And then she says, "Dad, what did you guys do in the old days?" Remember the old days? And I really had to think about it. I said, I don't know, maybe he went to the library, maybe he had an encyclopedia that's out of date sitting around somewhere. Maybe he called somebody. We lived in blissful ignorance, okay, what do you want? You don't have to know every damn thing, these millennials. But the world has changed so much, we don't even realize. We're walking around with this cloud of continuously updated, infinitely varied information. Something happened 5 minutes ago, 5,000 years ago, anywhere. If you want to know, you can find out, okay? There are no secrets. There's nothing happening inside a corporation, inside a government that cannot and will not be news. So if we're doing something you don't want to see it on the front page of the paper, don't do it. Because it will be. There are no secrets. So we're extraordinarily informed, but also we are amazingly connected. Now, how connected are we? Here's another true fact. 1995, half the people on this planet had neither made nor received a single phone call in their entire life.
Say that again.
Half the people on this planet in 1995 had never made a phone call or received a phone call. Countries like India, there was one phone for 100 people. It was a socialist paradise. It took 14 years to get a phone. You put your name on a list. Okay, 2031, a phone shows up. Okay, so again, a dramatic change. What do we have today? There are more phone numbers on this planet than there are people. Homeless people in India now have phones, right, as anywhere. And it is a powerful, it's a life-changing technology if you don't have it versus having it. And of course we have social media. Facebook is up to almost 2 billion. Nothing like this has ever existed before. Our capacity for connecting and sharing, it's like we have a shared central nervous system for all of humanity, where anything that happens anywhere can be known and then acted upon, and energies can coalesce around causes and ideas. And we can have things that spring up out of seemingly nowhere, Arab Springs and women's marches, right? But there's an underlying infrastructure that actually enables that to happen, which again has not existed even within a city block. Forget about on a planetary level. Now this is less well known. We are becoming smarter. Did you know this? We can all pat each other on the back. This guy, James Flynn, looked at the IQ testing data. Many of us have had those IQ tests, right, at some point. Now the average is always 100 by design. It's always set at 100 so you can know where it is relative to the average. But if you look at the raw data, it gets normalized, but if you look at the raw data, he looked at 80 years of data on IQ testing and he found an underlying trend that if you don't normalize it, there's actually a 3 to 4% increase every decade in average IQ. Now if you do the compound math on that, okay, just do 1.035 raised to the power of 8, you find that there's a 34%. So the average person today of 100 IQ would be at 134 in 1937. What would that make you? Close to, you'd put you on the top 2% of intelligence. Let me say that again. The average person today would be smarter than 98% of the people just 80 years ago. When it comes to analytical intelligence, that's one kind of intelligence. We used to think that's the only kind. Now we know there's more, but it still matters. Is that extraordinary or what? I mean, in one lifetime, to have that kind of jump, ordinary human beings are actually extraordinary. They're capable of extraordinary things. People are capable of understanding complexity at a level they never had before. Look at television programming today versus in the 1950s, okay? Is there any comparison? I mean, you look back, they look simplistic. The old stuff, no? And the new stuff is incredible sophistication and depth. And some of this too, I can't even figure out some of these movies. It's like, it's like you need a pad and a pencil to figure out what's going on in these things, right? There's complex. So again, human beings are evolving rapidly when it comes to intelligence as well. But if you only have intelligence and you don't have education, it's really untapped potential. It's even a bigger tragedy, because I've got these people of even greater capacity than we've ever had, and if you don't give them education. And here again, the story is pretty dramatic, because 100 years ago, only 9% of Americans finished high school. And today, close to 90% do. And of those who finished high school, only 25% at most went to college, and today about 60% plus. Countries like South Korea, 75% go to college. And of those who did go to college, only about 20% were women 100 years ago. And of those women, 80-90% went into the so-called women's fields. What were they? Education, nursing, things like that, right? And today, women make up 58% of college students. Not only, that's the US, but also 28 industrialized, the OECD nations. That's the average. Women outnumber men in college everywhere in this world except South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Even in Saudi Arabia and Iran, women outnumber men in college. Okay, and they get higher grades everywhere. I mean, I've been teaching for, I know, higher grades, and they complete their degrees at a higher rate. Now, what does that mean for society? Just think about that. In an age when more and more things require higher education, women have an inherent advantage. And every white-collar profession will be statistically dominated by women in years to come. It's already happening. Which means that society is going to fundamentally change as a consequence of this. Because not only will we have large numbers of women in increasingly significant roles, but also more and more women in leadership. By the way, 1989 was also the year when we had cumulatively more women college graduates than men. And now it's far in favor of women. So what does that mean? It means a rise of feminine values in society. Because we have had millennia, essentially all of human history, every societal institution run by men, on a limited set of masculine values, which are domination, aggression, ambition, winning, results at all costs, short-term orientation. Everything is a battle. Not to demean masculine values, there are many beautiful masculine values like discernment, focus, strength, courage, resilience, right? But unfortunately, most things have been run based upon the more immature or hyper-masculine values. And now we're seeing the rise of feminine values. Nurturing, caring, compassion, empathy, relationships, win-win, long-term thinking. The possibility for everybody to flourish together. These ideas are now becoming more important, recognized as being more central. And lots of research coming out of this. So a book called The Athena Doctrine, 60,000 interviews around the world. 30,000 to ask what is feminine, what is masculine, because the language gets in the way sometimes, right? What do we consider to be feminine and masculine today? And what are the attributes of good leaders? And then they put the two data sets together. And here's what you find, a strong correlation between the feminine and good leadership. All the pink things are considered feminine. And strongly related to leadership, expressive, reasonable, flexible, loyal, patient, etc. Not only leadership, it's also strongly related to morality, even more strongly actually than leadership. And it is strongly related to happiness. Feminine values are human values. And they have been suppressed in men and women. How many little boys are told, be a man, don't show emotion? Yeah? There's a deep wounding that happens. Shows up in aggression and violence later when that is suppressed as a child. Women have been forced to subdue the feminine because you're going out there in a world of men. You're putting on your armor and your mask. And men have to do that too, by the way. Right? They have to put on this persona to do battle in business. The only women who could succeed were the ones who could outdo men at that game. So 20 years ago, there was one woman running a Fortune 500 company, Katharine Graham of the Washington Post, but her father started it, so almost doesn't count. She was a good leader, but today there are 25 women running Fortune 500 companies, including General Motors and IBM and DuPont, and this is not Avon Cosmetics. Mainstream companies, and the trend line, the numbers are still small, 5%, but the trend line is certainly there. The only women you saw in leadership were in politics. So who did you see? Margaret Thatcher, what was her nickname? Iron Lady, right? Who was the original Iron Lady? Golda Meir in Israel. Tougher than the toughest men. They've all been tough, but she was tougher than all of them. In India, we had Indira Gandhi. Now, she was known as the only man in her cabinet. She was, in fact, the only woman in her cabinet. But she was tougher than the toughest men. So that's the only way women could survive and succeed in a man's world, was by being more of that. But that's changing. And even the men today have to integrate, right, masculine and feminine. So that's really a big theme This is an image from India. We have many gods. We have a god for every occasion. Okay? Now this is a symbol, what's called the Ardhareshwar, half male, half female. And this is seen as the ultimate expression of a human being. We all have gender, right? But there's a way to transcend that in our growth and evolution of our consciousness so that we actually embody the best of both. So we have Shiva on this side with the strength and all the things, right? And then we have the grace and elegance, all of the other qualities as well, simultaneously. Can we embody that? Can we integrate Carl Jung said every man has an inner woman, every woman has an inner man. Can we figure out how to integrate those? Can we become whole human beings? Right? So we're not a one note, everything is always the same approach. So this is actually the theme of my most recent book called Shakti. Shakti is an Indian word that represents energy or power, sort of a divine power. The power that grows and fuels everything in the universe. And how can we harness that in our leadership? We are also becoming more conscious. Let me be conscious of time here. How are we doing? I thought I had a timer, but the phone screen went blank. So 9:35, 8:30, 10. So about 25 minutes? Okay. We are becoming more conscious as human beings. Do you agree? You think we're waking up? You're shaking your head. Yeah, of course we're not there. But the question is, are we becoming? Think about it. Our whole journey on this planet can be seen as one of gradually waking up to our own higher potential as divine beings, right? And we're rising from that survivalist, animalistic, almost existence that most people unfortunately were subjugated to. And now we're starting to explore the higher reaches. And as we wake up, as we take off those blinders that we could only look at tomorrow and myself, survival, right? And we start to now step back and we see the bigger picture. And we also start to understand the longer term consequences, not just on tomorrow, but on the future of my actions today. And not only on myself, but on others. We start to have a better sense, a different sense of right and wrong. What was okay is no longer okay. Because when it was a matter of survival, almost everything is okay. But now, we start to see other things. And we have a finer sense of right and wrong. So think about the things we accepted and embraced throughout human history, but we no longer do. 150 years ago, slavery was the law of the land here, but also in many other societies. In fact, going back in human history, it was part of every human civilization. In India and China, the Greeks, Romans, etc., all had slavery and all thought it was perfectly natural and normal, including many of the slaves thought, well, this is just the way it is. And today we cannot imagine that. 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote. The US was what, 1918? Is that 18, right? So we're less than 100 years. This democracy is really less than 100 years old in that sense, right? Only New Zealand and a couple of other island states democracies had women with the right to vote. Switzerland, parts of Switzerland, well into the, I think, late 80s, women did not have full voting rights. And a couple of years ago I was there, they said, we just elected, we had an election, now there's majority female leading governing council in Switzerland, out of the 9. 75 years ago, we still had colonialism, which is another form of slavery. India was still a British. This is the 70th year. So, can't imagine that now. That's gone away. 50 years ago, there was still segregation in many parts of this country. 30 years ago, there was still apartheid in South Africa. 15 years ago, there was no gay marriage. Started in Massachusetts 14 or so years ago. There are many things. There are things we are doing today that we're going to look back on with horror. Say, how did we tolerate that? I mean, I think the biggest one is our prison system, which is just a shame. The shame of America is our track record and our way of thinking about that whole area. This country incarcerates a higher percentage of its citizens than any other country by far on the planet, including China and Cuba and any other North Korea you want to name, okay? And so that'll be, and there is a consciousness about that that's starting to change, but still it's there. And John Mackey would say the factory farming system, the way animals are treated in the factory farms before they become part of the food supply is a daily holocaust. It's extraordinary. And most people don't want to see. I mean, you look at some of those pictures and you say, oh my God, right? And it's starting to change a little bit, but long way to go on that. So again, a lot of things happening. We are actually becoming more peaceful. Did you know that we are living in the most peaceful time in human history? Did you know that? Do you believe me? Yes. There's a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. Big book, lots of data, 20-minute TED Talk. Nowadays you can have the shortcut, right? He's got many TED Talks. Professor at Harvard, wonderful book. He looked at human history and he said, we are living by far the most peaceful life. Violence is down 90, 95, even 99% compared to historic norms. Be glad you're alive today. When I was living in New York City in the 80s, there were 4,000 murders a year. Last year there were 380, I think. Nothing to do with my leaving the place. Okay? But this is true. I mean, there are fewer people being killed in wars by far. Okay, no major countries have gone to war with each other since World War II. Major as in, the big established democracies. Actually, fewer people being killed by terrorists even today compared to many periods in history. Certainly murder rates are down, accidental deaths are down on the roads, school violence is down, bullying is down, domestic violence is down, rapes are down. That's the data. As Bill Clinton said, don't mistake the headlines for the trend lines. The headline screams one thing, the trend line might be the opposite. Why? Because we have 100 times more media than ever before, right? And that which is unusual is what gets the headline. So there's a lot of indicators that we are waking up. Resorting to violence is an animalistic response, would you say no? Right? Doesn't solve anything. We are recognizing that as more conscious beings. Violence doesn't solve anything. And of course we're learning the power of inclusivity and diversity, as well as learning how to live in harmony with nature rather than trying to conquer nature and go against. Mother Nature always prevails, eventually. Can we live in harmony? So that's a lot of change. Would you agree? And as Lincoln said, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. And this is more true today than when he said it, in a broader way. A door like this has cracked open only a few times in our entire existence, as Tom Stoppard wrote. It's the best time to be alive when almost everything you thought you knew is wrong. Rethink everything, okay? Every assumption, every mental model. And so what does it mean for business? Let's finally come to that. Business as usual is not an option. How can we continue business as usual? We cannot continue anything as usual. Everything has to be relooked at. So what will it take for companies or businesses to be instruments of flourishing? As an example of a company like that, just very briefly talk about Whole Foods, which is going through some struggles right now. But every business, conscious business is still a business. You still have to have certain things, so there are cyclical challenges. But think about fundamentally what Whole Foods has been about, starting with their reason for being. Why did Whole Foods come into existence in 1978? Because a bunch of people got together and had a passion around food, and they said, it matters what you put into your body. It matters to your health, but also the health of the food system and the health of the planet as a whole. How we produce and consume food matters. Right? And that was their passion. Their original name was Safer Way. Whole Foods' first name was Safer Way. Why? Because there's a safe way out there, right? They said, not quite. Right? So the higher purpose exists. There's a reason for being. Every one of us should have a purpose in our lives other than to make money. Why is it that businesses, we say, you only make money? Businesses in that sense can be like people. They can have their own purpose. They must have their own purpose. We'll come back to that. Then they have this document on their website, you'll find Declaration of Interdependence. Not independence, but interdependence. There's a state that's beyond independence. Recognizing that we're all connected together through this company, all the stakeholders, customers, employees, community, suppliers, farmers, investors, all are part of this system connected together, and we're all interdependent. The well-being of each is tied in with the well-being of the others. And any one of them can bring down the whole if you don't pay attention. So recognizing that interdependence, which means that we have to make every decision in a way that benefits, or certainly doesn't harm, some stakeholders while benefiting others, and ideally benefits all at the same time. You can also see, talking about income inequality, the typical public company in the US, the ratio of CEO pay to average pay is about 400 to 1. It's been as high as 550 to 1 in years. Whole Foods has capped their salary at 19 to 1, highest to median. Right? So it's much more modest, people at the top. People at the front lines are paid better and have better benefits than peers in other companies, but people at the top are paid far more modestly. In fact, you could make 20 times more as a senior food industry executive if you go and work for Kroger or somebody else. But they choose not to. They stay here. Why? Because they believe in the purpose. There are people who know that money is not, it's not just about having as much money as possible, that you have enough at some point. They know when enough, right? So for some people, there is never enough. They are not emotionally mature people. It's like a buffet and saying, I can't leave. The buffet is still open. Right? At some point. So again, you have leaders who care about more than money. And you can see some of these other things, right? Over the long term, a tremendous investment. More than 2,000% returns since they went public. So they represent the four principal ideas or pillars or tenets of conscious capitalism. Higher purpose. Every business must have a purpose other than profit. You need profit to survive, but that can't be your purpose. I need red blood cells to live. It's not my purpose. Okay, something other than that. Integrating the interests of all their stakeholders together, having leaders who care about people and purpose, not just about power and money. And cultures that are rooted in trust and caring and not fear and stress. So it answers all of these questions: why, what, who, how. And for each of these I have a convenient acronym. I love acronyms, so I'll have a handy acronym for each of these. Okay, very quickly now, purpose. I believe every purpose needs to be a healing purpose. Why healing? We live in a world of extraordinary, almost unimaginable suffering. Do you agree? If you just stop to think about how much suffering goes on all the time, every day, it'll break your heart. And in a world with so much suffering, if we are not consciously part of the healing, we may unconsciously be part of the hurting. And many of us are, as individuals and as organizations. Can we consciously be about alleviating pain and suffering and bringing more joy in the world through whatever it is that we choose to do? Can that be an element of it? So healing as a meta idea around purpose, but then also it's the acronym for the qualities of a great purpose. It's heroic. You're trying to do something worth doing. And that's not easy. It's evolving and it's evolutionary. It's in harmony with our human journey of evolution. And it evolves as the company grows. It aligns everybody together. Literally now the stakeholders are not at cross purposes because they have a shared purpose. A company that's only about making money, everybody's at cross purposes. Why? Because company wants to make money, employees want to maximize salary, minimize work, customers want to minimize price, right? Every time. Suppliers want to get paid as much and spend as little as possible. Society wants to tax you as much as possible, right? Everybody becomes a taker from the system when you have a profit maximizing mindset, because you're maximizing your profit, why shouldn't I maximize mine? Everybody becomes a taker. And when everybody's a taker on a system, that system bleeds and dries. In order to win, you must give. And when you give, you receive far more because you nourish the whole, right? So it's aligning, it's loving, it's rooted in love and care. That's a fundamental aspect of all of this I'll come back to. It's inspiring, it attracts people, right? It's natural, it's in harmony with nature, and it's natural for your company to be doing that, and it galvanizes you into action. Many great examples of this. Google has always been a highly purpose-driven company from the day they were born. Organize the world's information and make it easily accessible and useful. And that has given them endless possibilities to add value. REI, reconnect people with nature. We had the CEO, Sally Jewell, who was the Interior Secretary actually under Obama, but before that she was CEO of REI. At our conference, she had tears in her eyes. She said, our kids are spending 52 hours in front of a screen a week and only 20 minutes in nature. And that ratio keeps getting worse. So what are we doing to ourselves? We're part of nature and we're losing our connect with nature. And we exist only to reconnect people with nature. We'll teach you everything about hiking in the woods, and if you go and order it from Amazon, okay, that's fine. We at least got you connected to nature. That's our real purpose. Facebook, why do they get so big and so successful so quickly? Well, they have a purpose. Make the world more open and connected. There's a hunger for that. Okay, so the second pillar is stakeholder integration. And here the acronym is SPICE. Now, why SPICE? Now, I'm from India. Everything has spice, okay? You can't imagine life without spice. Even your laundry detergent has spice in it, okay? We added the E for environment, so it's spicy. It stands for the stakeholders, I think in the right order. You start with society. You have to be on the right side of society. We can't be adding to society's burdens and problems. We have to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But partners, investors, customers, employees, all of them we can operate with a unconscious level, as you can see at the top, blindly following the highest returns. There's a human being behind that hamburger, but we call him a consumer. His job is to just consume. We don't care about his well-being when we think that way, right? But if you look down here, it's a more conscious way of thinking about each of those stakeholders. I was just at a retreat and somebody talked about, remember the Spice Girls? I don't know if they're still around, but they had a song. It said, tell me what you want, tell me what you really, really want. Okay? That's what you have to do with your stakeholders. Find out what they want. Find out what they really, really want. Right? To understand and serve them at a deeper level. Consciously serve all stakeholders. Don't use them as a means to making money. Say, how can I serve my suppliers? How can I serve my employees and their families? Create value for everyone. That's how you create value for the whole. And when you do it right, it becomes a virtuous cycle. So Whole Foods has their purpose, has their values. They hire people with congruent values who really are foodies, who care about health. So for them, working at Whole Foods, like, wow, this is fun, right? It's not just a job. So they give them great benefits and pay and so forth. Happy, they're highly motivated, they're innovative, great service. Do the same thing with suppliers. You get good products, you have good service. Customers are happy, delighted, come back. Sales grow, profits grow, investors are happy, right? And you also have then resources. They give 5% of their profits to local nonprofits. They have 5 different foundations that they support, that they created. The Whole Planet Foundation, which is 80 countries now, helping with micro-lending, mostly women, to transition to organic and more natural. They have the Whole Cities Foundation, which is bringing better food to the inner cities. In Detroit and New Orleans and Newark and Chicago and so forth, opening stores. There's the Whole Kids Foundation that is bringing healthier food to school lunch programs and putting in salad bars and putting in vegetable gardens. Right? They had the Animal Partnership, Global Animal Partnership, which is about elevating the humane treatment of animals. They have one that has to do with seafood as well. So that's stakeholders. Then we come to leaders. Now, when you leave India, they tell you you must use a Gandhi slide, okay, in every presentation. And you can make him say whatever you want, okay? He's our Yogi Berra, He probably, I don't know if he said this, it's the kind of thing that he would have said. You never know. Or he should have said, right? No, I think he did say this. We must be the change we wish to see. In fact, there's a story about a mother who came to him and said, my kid is eating too many sweets, and can you talk to him? And he said, and Gandhi looked at him and said, well, I guess I have to give up sweets now. Because I can't tell the kids not to have sweets if I don't, so I have to give up sweets, You cannot have a conscious company without a conscious leader, and you cannot be a conscious leader unless you're a conscious human being. So working on our own consciousness is the most significant thing that we can do if you're aligned with any of this. And leadership matters always, but even more today than ever. Even though people are intelligent and they're educated and they're conscious and they're awakened and they're in touch with their family, all of that, people are extraordinary, still need leaders. As Peter Drucker said, only 3 things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, underperformance. Okay, everything else takes leadership. You can put the most amazing group of people together, come back a few hours later, you'll have friction, confusion, underperformance. Unless somebody steps into the mantle of leadership, which is create a vision for what are we trying to do here, and then how do we all work together to get that done, right? Something that will take us all to a better place. And the shorthand here is selfless. A conscious leader has to be selfless. Every leader has to be selfless. If you are a leader who is using other people to achieve your goals, if you're selfish, you cannot be a great leader. If you're using other people to achieve your goals, that doesn't make you a leader, that makes you a tyrant. That is the definition of a tyrant. You're like Henry VIII. A leader is there to serve and take people to a better place. There's an awesome responsibility. It's the stewardship of the lives entrusted to you. And not just the lives that are in front of you, the lives that they touch, their children, their families, all impacted by your leadership. And then it stands for all these qualities. As you can see, and you can see strength as well as love and care, masculine and feminine together. Okay? Emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, systems intelligence, all of these these all can be learned, by the way. IQ is fixed. When I talked about everybody's getting smarter, none of us are getting smarter, it's kind of fixed. Our children are smarter than we are. That's how it goes in society, right? But IQ is fixed, but EQ and spiritual and those other forms of intelligence can be cultivated and grown. So those are the qualities, and really, where's the end point of all of this? My co-author on that last book came up with this beautiful phrase, you must be the wise fool of tough love as a leader. You're wise, you're the higher self, the divine, you're in touch with that, and you're childlike and playful as well, and humorous. You're wise and foolish, and you can be tough and loving. Masculine, feminine, higher self and child self, all together in one being. Martin Luther King called it being tough-minded and tender-hearted. Those are polarities that need to go together. Right? These are all polarities we think are opposite. You can be tough or you can be loving. You can be wise or you can be... No, it's like breathing in and breathing out. Right? You can't say I have a preference for breathing in. We need the polarities to work together. Right? And then, once you become that whole person, you have to then be flexible to know, in this situation I need to show up with a gentle approach. In this situation I need to lighten it up. Here I need to be tough. Right? Have the discernment and the flexibility to then be the right kind of leader for the situation. Okay, very quickly. I was afraid to look at my watch, but I'm almost done. Culture. The fourth element is culture. And again, Drucker, he said culture is strategy for lunch. We think it doesn't wait. Culture matters a lot. Everybody in this country, every MBA student knows the strategy of every great company. Whether it's Southwest Airlines or Google or Starbucks, you know what they do, how they do. But you can't replicate it. Why? Because something unique in their culture. Culture is something that it cannot be just copied. You have to create your own. And the qualities here are, the shorthand is tactile. Tactile is something you can touch and feel. A culture is invisible and yet you can feel it. You walk into a conscious business, you can feel the joy, the energy, the positivity, all of that. It's very tangible. And it stands for all these qualities: trust, authenticity, caring, transparency, etc. And I'm going to focus on caring just for the last few minutes here, because that is the fundamental difference between a conscious company and one that is not, is that conscious businesses are also built on love and care in addition to everything else. Can you in fact do that? Was a question that the founders of Whole Foods actually asked when they first started the company. Can you build a business? And we look around at our friends and they're all stressed out. They hate their jobs. And they don't look forward to going to work. Because most businesses are run on fear and stress. We use carrots and sticks. What animal belongs between a carrot and a stick? It's a jackass, not a human being. And yet that's our metaphor for motivation of human beings. Tremendous fear and stress associated with work for most people. It's either indifference or it's fear and stress. Okay? And they would love to get away with indifference, but sometimes you can't. You're subjected to fear and stress. So why do we have this thing? Thank God it's Friday, right? Probably don't have it here. You do? Okay. But TGI, why is that not questioned at all? Right? I mean, when I first came to this country, I used to ask my American friends, so I thought you go to church on Sunday. What's all this about thanking God on Friday? Of course, I was being a wise ass, but don't you get it? We survived another hellish week at work, and now we get to live, which means we get to party, which means we get drunk. And we do it again on Saturday. And then Sunday rolls around, and then what? I was at a conference with the Dalai Lama in Seattle, and he said heart attacks are highest on Monday morning. You think that's true? But see, the thing is, I can't make up stuff anymore because Jody here is fact-checking as we speak. It's like no more bullshit, you know. Real-time fact checks. Look it up. There are 2 studies that show a 20% increase in heart attacks. Our work is literally killing us. Murderers and terrorists are not. Our work is killing us. That's not exaggeration. 75% of our healthcare crisis is chronic disease, and most of that is stress, and most of that is work. Okay? Look at employee engagement. Only about 30% in the US, which is by far it's the highest in the world, by the way. Only 3 out of 10 Americans are actually engaged. 5 are disinterested, and 20% are hostile to their own work, their own company. It's like you've got a canoe with 10 people who are supposed to be rowing, and 3 are actually rowing, and 5 are skimming the surface, looking busy, and 2 are hitting other people over the head with their paddles. You're not going to get very far or go very fast. But also think about the cost in terms of human lives. We only have this one life to live, okay? Well, in India we think we have more. But let's assume we only have the one life. And we only have 100,000 hours to work. If you add it up, 50 years, 40 hours a week. And that's a source of deep meaning and fulfillment for human beings if we can get the right kind of work. People want that. Most people never get close to that. So it's a waste of extraordinary human potential. Human beings are extraordinary, and we put them in these circumstances where they can barely survive and only realize a fraction of their extraordinary potential. And of course, it's a huge financial drain as well. And this is the best in the world. Globally, only 13% are engaged. 87% of people worldwide. The way we work isn't working. So as Freud said, allegedly, all these people, who knows who said what. Love and work are the cornerstones of our humanness. The 2 things that define what it means to be a human. Work is an inherent, important part of human lives. Okay, that's why we have these hands, and we have these minds, and we have all this. And yet most people never get that opportunity. So why can't we combine the 2? We've kept them separate, right? Come to work, you do all this, leave all the caring and all that bullshit aside, leave that at home. Why can't we combine? Why can't we love what we do? And love the people we work with, and love the people we serve? Why can't we? And that was really the foundation of my research 10 years ago in this book, Firms of Endearment. Looking for companies that people love. Using words like those to describe these companies. And we had 28 companies in the original book. We just did a second edition with 72 companies actually worldwide. A lot more data this time. And here's our assumption. So these are companies that actually, we discovered these pillars of conscious capitalism by looking at these companies that people love. And we found that they have the sense of purpose, and they take care of everybody, and they have leaders and culture that match what we talked about. And we then said, okay, how do they do financially? What do you think? What would you expect? They're paying their people better. Some cases double. Like Costco pays double of Walmart and provides much better health care. Sorry?
I'm sorry, Costco what?
Costco pays their people double what Walmart pays, and also covers like 95% of healthcare costs. Employee turnover at Costco is 7%, Walmart is 70%. Right? They take care of their customers, invest in customer care. They pay their suppliers well, right? They don't squeeze their suppliers. They invest in their communities. They invest in the environment. They pay taxes at a higher rate. So maybe there's a little less left over for investors, right? Because there's no free lunch, right? Well, as it turned out, this was over a 15-year period, these companies outperformed the market by a 14-to-1 ratio. In the original, it was 9-to-1 over 10 years. But now we have a larger set of companies, more global. They dramatically outperform even as they're taking care of all of their stakeholders. It's not, love is not a pie. You don't have to divide it up and say, you get more, you get less. Everybody can get more. There's no end to value creation when you align everything together. Business is the ultimate win-win game in the world. We still play it like it's a win-lose or even a lose-lose game. So these companies make a lot of money. And that's important. Making money is a social good. It is socially irresponsible not to be profitable if you're a business. You're using resources that could be better put elsewhere. Society doesn't function without profits. No profits, no taxes, no taxes, no roads, no infrastructure, no public health, no public schools. It all originates with profits. But it matters how you make the money. Right? And these companies make a lot of money, but they also make other things, positive impacts, because businesses create, but they also destroy wealth. The last economic crisis, about $3 trillion of financial wealth was destroyed almost overnight. Right? But it's also intellectual capital we create, innovation, breakthroughs, social capital, trust and cohesion that exists in society, emotional well-being, operating from love and care in my life rather than fear and stress, spiritual well-being, having meaning and purpose in your life through your work. It's the impact on the culture, what defines a good life. We spend $1 trillion on marketing every year in this country. That was the GDP of India a few years ago. We were spending that much in 2007. That was the GDP of India on marketing. We have a huge impact on the culture. Okay? Not all of it positive. In fact, most of it negative through that spending. The impact on our bodies and the impact on the environment. These are all the consequences of the way you operate as a business. And a conscious business tries to have a positive impact in all these areas for all of their stakeholders for all time. And a traditional business will say, well, business is only about making money. Milton Friedman told us so. Right? And everything else that happens is a side effect. And if you ever watch the evening news, you know all about side effects. Do you? Any medicine ad? You see a medicine ad? Frolicking in the meadows. Yeah, everything looks good. Then you get the list of side effects. Yeah, we make money, and if you make money, there are going to be side effects, right? I'm sorry, but that's just the price of doing business. Well, unfortunately, there's no such thing on this planet called a side effect. We do things, and there are effects. And just because we put it in fine print or we say it really fast doesn't make it less important. In fact, the so-called side effect might be more significant than your so-called main effect in terms of impact on people's lives. So we need to do business with a spectrum of positive effects. And it can be done. If something exists, it must be possible. It does exist. It is possible. If you have that consciousness and that intention, you can consciously create value of all those kinds for all your stakeholders. Have that effect. Now think about this. This is kind of the complacency that we've had in the past, right? Right? I mean, we're sort of fortunate in this world. There are millions and billions of people who are desperately trying to survive, even today. And in the past, we would have said, sorry, not my problem, better luck next time. I mean, I'm high and dry. I'm good. But we're starting to recognize now that we are all in the same boat. There is no there's no other. We're all interconnected, interdependent. We thought we solved our environmental problems in this country because we sent manufacturing abroad, the polluting manufacturing especially, a lot of it. Air and water quality is better. But then you read that in China, there are cities where kids have to put on a gas mask to go to school. And rivers are so polluted, you can't even use the water for industrial cooling, forget about agriculture or drinking. I say, we don't want that to be the consequence of our consumption. And then you read about these toxic clouds floating over California, full of poisonous gases. You look up, it says made in China. It comes around. This planet is one system. We're all interconnected. Right? We have to start recognizing that and acting that way. So humanity is one spirit, interconnected, interdependent. Our natural resources are finite. We've always known that. But now we're actually bumping into those limits. We are running out of stuff. But what is unlimited on this planet? It's human capacities. What's inside us? There's a Korean steel company I work with called POSCO. At the entrance to their steel plant, it says, resources are limited, creativity is unlimited. Is there any end, any limit to human creativity? We haven't found it. A tiny fraction of human beings in human history have created extraordinary things, and today we have billions of people with the opportunity and the ability. Human creativity has within it the answer to everything. It's the most powerful resource, renewable resource we've ever known on this planet. When we figured out what was inside an atom, It literally blew us away. Right? What's inside us? Human beings have extraordinary, divine potential, and we need to we get a way of unlocking that, and we do that by these kinds of ideas. Because think about it, the human seed has never been more potent or powerful. But the soil has never been more toxic. And you know better than I, you can have the most amazing seed. If you put it in toxic soil, it's not going to amount to anything. The soil is the organizations, it's the leadership, it's the culture. It's the purpose, it's the values. Even ordinary seeds will thrive in that environment. So that's what we're about. We have to create businesses, we have to create the soil in which people can actually bring what they're already capable of. And human beings are not a resource. A resource is like a lump of coal. What happens to a resource? You use it, it depletes, it burns out, right? It goes away. Human beings in the right setting are a source. And the source is like the sun that continuously generates light and warmth and energy, caring, compassion, creativity, innovation. Human beings are capable of all of that without limit. But we have to create the conditions where that can happen. So those of us who are alive today can choose to lead the most meaningful lives human beings have ever led on this planet. Because our challenges are greater than ever. We know that. We have crises on multiple fronts. We know that. There's 7 billion of us heading to 9 billion. We know that. The fact that we know that and we are conscious of that, and we have the ability to do something about it at an individual and collective level, that's never been greater either. So we have this extraordinary opportunity. There's never been a time when there's more greater opportunity for adding value and making a difference in the world. But we believe that happens best in the context of business. If business can do it, business should do it. If it can't be, then it should be done by nonprofits and government. But not any old business. It has to be a business rooted in higher purpose and in love and care. And that's when human beings will truly thrive. So that's what our movement is about. Thank you for your patience today and for being here and for listening. Thank you.